They gave gifts, gold, which represented the royalty of Jesus, frankincense, which represented the divinity of Jesus, and interestingly, myrrh, which was a spice used in embalming. And to me, that just foreshadows the death, the ultimate death that Jesus, his mission in this world was to die for the sins of humankind.
Everybody knows that Christmas is more than just lights and gifts and traditions. But did you ever think about this? Christmas is actually a claim about history itself. Well, is it true? Did God really step into space and time? Is the story of Jesus' birth grounded in fact, or is it just a legend that we borrowed from other religions? Hi, I'm Jeff Myers. This is the Truth Changes Everything podcast. In this show, I call up people I want to learn from, and I ask them questions and I record it so you can watch along with me. So today's conversation, we're going to investigate the evidence behind the nativity, exploring prophecy, the virgin birth, historical reliability of scripture, because at stake is whether Christianity rests on a myth or on a solid foundation of truth. That will have implications for everything else that happens in the world today. And my guest is Lee Strobel. Lee is a former award-winning legal editor of the Chicago Tribune. He's a New York Times best-selling author whose books have sold millions of copies worldwide. Lee earned a degree in journalism at the University of Missouri and was awarded a Ford Foundation Fellowship to study at Yale Law School, where he received a Master of Studies in Law degree. He was a journalist for 14 years at the Chicago Tribune and other newspapers. He won Illinois' top honors for investigative reporting and public service journalism from the United Press International. And you probably have heard his story before. He's a former atheist. And now he's been serving as an author and a teaching pastor at some of America's largest churches. Let's welcome Lee Strobel to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Lee Strobel, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
Well, thank you, Jess. So great to be with you. I'm so happy and proud of what you do at Summit Ministries. I tell everybody about it all the time and say, get your young people there. It'll change their lives.
Well, that means so much coming from you, Lee, because we have your books in our bookstore, and you've been a great friend to the ministry for a long time. And I think our students just love and appreciate the way you bring an investigative journalist spirit to talking about things that, you might learn about in an apologetics class if you happen to take one in a Sunday school or at a Christian college. But the way you bring it to life is just extraordinary. And so thank you for your work.
Thanks. I get the privilege to interview great scholars. That's the secret. I just go to really good sources and keep questioning them until they get it on the cookies in the bottom shelf, so I can get them.
Well, I tell you, that's really actually the motivation behind this show. It's called Truth Changes Everything, but my whole goal is to call up people who know things that I'm really curious about and ask them questions, and then just let other people listen in on the conversation.
Oh, that's great.
It's perfect. Well, today we're going to talk about a new book that you've got. This is so exciting, and it's The Case for Christmas, and you end the book by saying, I hate to give away the ending before the beginning here, but you end the book by saying that Christmas is not based on legend or mythology, but that the wonder of the incarnation of our Savior Jesus Christ is actually built on a solid foundation of historical truth.
Yes.
Talk about why that would matter. I'm thinking of a student today who's finishing up final exams, getting ready to go home for Christmas. They see all the traditions and the decorations and so forth. But why is it important that Christmas is history, not just a mystical story?
Yeah, if it's just once upon a time in a distant, far-off land, some fairy tale, make-believe, then who cares? The best stories are the ones that turn out to be true. And that is true of Christmas, that it is reality, and that we have historical data that points to it. I love the fact, for instance, that we have two detailed accounts of the birth of Jesus, and one of them is from Luke, who I love because he's sort of a first-century investigative reporter. And he doesn't begin his gospel by saying, oh, once upon a time in a land far, far away. No, he says, I carefully investigated everything so I could write an orderly account about the certainty of what took place. So he interviewed people. He checked things out. He investigated. And I love that. Let's get to the truth, because if it is true, it changes everything.
It does change everything. And I love that. It's interesting. Probably everybody who's watching or listening has experiences of things that seemed completely improbable, but turned out to actually be true.
Yeah.
And so we recognize that that's happening. But let's just, let's kind of go back to the beginning here. Let's start with the birth of Jesus itself. Yeah. We have all these images of the nativity scene in our mind. Right. We played with the little dolls as we were children. But you're arguing that what likely happened in Bethlehem looked different than that. And so can you unpack that for us and tell us how that helps us trust the Gospels as a source of reliable history?
Yeah, well, the Gospels were originally written in the Greek language, and everything hinges on how one Greek word is translated. So here's the typical image we have of Christmas, that Mary and Joseph are heading to Bethlehem because he's of the house of David, and there's going to be a census. He has to be counted in the census. And she's pregnant, and they're arriving in Bethlehem. She's about to give birth. So they stop at an inn, a lodge. And the mean old innkeeper says, sorry, no room at the lodge, no room at the inn. And they are forced to go off to a stable or a cave where they give birth among the animals, and the baby is placed in the clean hay of a manger or a trough. That all hinges on one Greek word, katalima. And because it says in Luke that the baby was laid in the manger because there's no room for them in the katalima. And so the King James Version translated katalima as being an inn or a lodge. But I don't think, and most scholars don't think, that's the correct translation of the word. So let me give you a setting. In the first century Bethlehem, what a house looked like was one large room divided into two parts. The larger part was the living area. That's where the family would sleep and eat and so forth. And then there were a couple of steps down into a kind of a side part of the room, and that's where the animals were brought at night. Now, there were like pets. You may have a couple of sheep, a couple of goats, and the floor was slanted so they could clean it easily in the morning. And there's a couple steps up, and sometimes the animals would wander up into the living area because they were like pets. I mean, who doesn't love a little baby lamb, right? And so they had mangers in both the living area as well as the animal area. Well, some of the bigger houses, some of the more wealthy people had a katalima, which is a guest room. That had a separate entrance, and it was a separate room. And so I think the best translation of katalima is that Mary and Joseph arrived. They knocked on the door of a relative, someone else from the house of David, and said, hey, we're here for the census. And they said, oh, we're so sorry. We've already got so many people coming for the census. There's no room in the katalima, in the guest room, but come into the living area and have the child there. And she gives birth in the living area. And yes, maybe some of the animals did wander up the stairs because wondering what the commotion was about. And there was a manger there, and the baby was placed in the manger. But it's interesting that in the year 1395, even before the King James Version, which did translate it as in 1395, John Wycliffe, in his translation, translated it as a room, as a guest room. And in Luke, he uses that word only one other time, and again, it's a room in a private residence. Luke knew a word, apondoheion, which is the Greek word for an inn. Because he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, and there's an inn that's involved. And so he knew if he was going to refer to a commercial establishment, that's the word he would have used, but he didn't use that word. So I think this probably is what actually happened. By the way, in first century Jewish culture, no innkeeper would ever turn away a pregnant Jewish woman. You would be ostracized. You would be run out of town on a rail. Hospitality had such a high value back then. You couldn't do that. And we didn't even know there was an inn in Bethlehem at the time because it wasn't on a crossroads. It was about 500 people or so. So maybe it didn't even have a commercial establishment. By the way, We don't know that Mary was on the verge of giving birth as she arrived. That's kind of part of the story. But because Luke says while they were in Bethlehem, she gave birth. Doesn't say while they were in Bethlehem 5 minutes or 5 days or 5 weeks. It doesn't say. But there was a book of fiction that was written in the year 200 AD. So that comes, more than, way time later. Doesn't have any real historical connection. And in that story, Mary and Joseph are 3 miles away from Bethlehem. They don't even get there. And she's giving birth, and she goes into a cave and gives birth among the animals in the cave. And that's the idea, where the idea of a cave came from. But it's not historically accurate. So I think that one Greek word does change a bit the way we think of what actually happened at that birth of Jesus.
Now that is fascinating information. But how does that build our trust in Luke's account?
Yeah, it does, because Luke is writing very close to the events. He's an investigator. He checked things out. Now, it's interesting. There are 4 Gospels. Only 2 of them have detailed stories about the birth of Jesus, Luke and Matthew. Now, Luke writes the story from Mary's perspective. I believe that's because he actually interviewed Mary, or if he didn't, he probably interviewed Susanna, or there's another woman who he interviews who were friends with Mary, and he mentions them in his gospel, Joanna and Susanna. And so he writes it from her perspective. Matthew, on the other hand, who was a disciple, writes from Joseph's perspective. And Matthew later became a leader in the church in Jerusalem. And guess who another major leader of the church of Jerusalem was? It was James, the brother of Jesus. And so I think James probably communicated to Matthew the story according to how they saw it and their father saw it at the time. And so he writes from a little different perspective. I was talking to a woman the other day, and she said, well, ask any guy, any father about the birth of their son, and then ask the mother, and you'll get 2 different perspectives, right? And I thought that's a good point. And they do have 2 perspectives. But the point is, these are very early accounts, and they're 2 accounts that are very early.
It's so interesting to hear this, because you do get this sense that if you were to make up a narrative like this, you wouldn't frame it
right
in either the way Matthew or Luke did.
That's true. That's true. You would never say that this woman got pregnant before marriage. I mean, my goodness, you're starting in a deficit there if you're trying to convince people this is a supernatural event or whatever. I mean, you would never make that up. I think that's not the kind of story that people would invent if they were making it out of whole cloth.
I'd love to talk about the book of Mark a little bit. Yeah. So the Gospel of Mark doesn't include a birth narrative.
Right.
As you mentioned, Luke and Matthew are where we find that. But you highlight this fascinating clue that you found in Mark chapter 6 that may allude to the virgin birth. And I'd love for you to explain that and why it matters for those who are looking at a factual basis for the earliest Christian traditions.
Yes. Now, Mark, which was the first gospel written, and Mark doesn't start with the birth of Jesus. He starts his gospel later in the life of Jesus. He's, of course, writing based on the reports of Peter, who was one of the inner circle with Jesus, just as John was. And so the fact that he doesn't include a birth narrative really doesn't mean anything. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. It doesn't really establish anything. But interestingly, in Mark chapter 6, verse 3, he refers to Jesus as Mary's son. Now, in first century Jewish culture, you would never refer to a boy as being the woman's son. It's always the father. It's always Joseph's son. Even if Joseph were deceased by then, you would still refer to Jesus as Joseph's son. And so I think this was Mark's way of kind of winking and say, yeah, I know that Joseph wasn't his actual biological father. I know there was something supernatural about the birth. It's kind of a wink in that direction, I think. And then we have John, who doesn't have a birth narrative either, but John, who writes last, doesn't repeat a lot of stuff in the other Gospels. And he has this grand theological opening to his Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. So that's the incarnation right there. But interestingly, John had a disciple named Ignatius. And Ignatius was arrested for his faith and was on his way to Rome to be executed. And he wrote 6 letters. It's about in the year 108 AD, so it's shortly after this all occurred. And in that letter, in one of those letters, he says, to quote him, he says, Jesus was, quote, really and truly born of a virgin. Well, where did he get that idea? I think he got it from John, who was his mentor.
Wow. So really, you can see all of the gospel accounts lining up.
That's right.
On this question.
Yes.
And now I know a lot of students, they're probably hearing this right now on college campuses. The Christmas story is just recycled mythology. That's what they're going to hear. And I've heard this before. I remember Bill Maher talked about this at one point in time. Look, everybody's got their virgin birth story, Mithras, Zeus, Krishna. Right. But you investigated that as well and found that those comparisons don't hold up. Tell us about what you discovered.
They do not hold up. Interestingly, this was propagated in the 1800s by some German theologians. It was completely disproven by Christian theologians and historians in the early 1900s. It became dogma in the Soviet Union. It was taught in their schools. And then with the internet, people have gone back to this stuff from the 1800s and propagated again as if it's true, not realizing it's been refuted by Christians for a long time. So, I'll give you the best example, I think, the most popular one in culture, which is from the Da Vinci Code, where Dan Brown in his book and his movies says that, Christianity is just a copycat religion. Where do they get this idea of the virgin birth of Jesus? Well, there was a myth, a pagan myth that existed before Jesus of Mithras. And Mithras was born of a virgin on December the 25th. He had 12 disciples. He died for world peace, and he was resurrected from the dead. So Christians just copy those ideas into the life of this fictional Jesus, and he's just another mythological figure. Well, when you research it, you find it's just not true. First of all, he wasn't born of a virgin. You go back to the original myth. Mithras emerged fully grown, naked, except he was wearing a hat, out of a rock. So unless you consider the rock to be a virgin, which I wouldn't, there was no virgin birth. Second, he was born on December 25th. Well, so what? We don't know the date that Jesus was born. It's not in the Bible. Third, he didn't have 12 disciples. According to one version, he had 1 disciple. According to another version, he had 2 disciples. He didn't die for world peace. Mithras was known for killing a bull. And there's no account in the myth of Mithras about how he died, so there's no account of a resurrection. So all of it just dissipates when you research it. And that is true of, people say, Alexander the Great was conceived by Zeus, the mythical god Zeus. And you do the research and you find that Olympias, who was Alexander the Great's mother, said it's not true. I mean, she came out and said, hey, it's not true. We have all these stories that just don't add up. When you investigate them, they are not pointing toward Jesus. They don't have legitimate virgin births. Another example is Dionysus, who's the god of fertility and wine. And you research that story. There's no virgin birth there. Zeus impregnates a princess. Zeus's queen gets all upset, and so she burns the fetus to a crisp. But Zeus rescues it, and he sews it into his thigh until the child is born. Well, that's not a virgin birth in any sense. People are just trying to draw parallels that simply do not exist.
That's fascinating. There are so many pastors, I think. I remember hearing a pastor say, look, this is probably the conversation. You have a virgin birth, so do we in our religion. And it's always bugged me because when I read those stories, I don't see any of these parallels. Just to give us a little insight into this, how did these German theologians even arrive at these explanations?
Well, they were looking for ways to escape from the conclusion that Jesus is who he claimed to be, the unique Son of God, who proved it by his virgin birth, by his resurrection, and so forth. So they're trying to find escape hatches from Christianity, and this seemed to be a handy one because they would do these. They would take things out of context from these ancient myths, and they would attach Christian terms to them, like virgin birth and so forth, to make it sound like it's a copycat thing. And there's a guy named Gordon Nash. He was a PhD in classical history. He wrote a book years ago setting the record straight and taking each of these cases and showing that they don't add up. And then in about the year 1990, he wrote another book called God and the Greeks. And in the introduction to that book, he said, I don't know why I'm writing this book. This stuff has been disproven 100 times over. Why? But he says it keeps coming up, so I'm going to write a book again. And he writes another book that just shoots down this stuff. And some of this stuff occurred after Christianity, so you got a time problem there. For instance, Zoroaster lived hundreds of years before Jesus, but the idea that his mom conceived him through drinking a sacred drink comes 900 years after Jesus. So there was probably some borrowing in the other direction, where people were taking ideas from Christianity and trying to apply them to their mythology.
That is fascinating. I do remember hearing J. Warner Wallace one time talking about how some of these myths got updated after the time of Jesus.
That's right. Zoroaster's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Okay, well, this is so good. We always think from a biblical worldview standpoint here, but a lot of people say, well, look, a virgin birth is scientifically impossible.
Yeah.
And so, we just, even though we question whether science can really solve all of our problems, we just have a really hard time believing that something that we observe as scientifically impossible actually took place.
Yeah,
but you're actually arguing that it makes sense if God exists.
Yes.
And it even makes theological sense for who Jesus is. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the great defenders of the Christian faith is Dr. William Lane Craig, 2 earned PhDs, and he's a great apologist. And he used to doubt the virgin birth. And I remember asking him years ago, why did you doubt the virgin birth? And he said, because for Mary to give birth to a male child, she must have had a Y chromosome in her ovum. She wouldn't have that. I mean, a female has 2 X chromosomes. You need an X and a Y chromosome to have a male child. She didn't have a Y chromosome, so she couldn't have a male child. So he used to dismiss the idea that the virgin birth was historical. Well, then he became famous for the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God, which says that whatever begins to exist as a cause, we now know the universe began to exist at some point in the past. Therefore, there must be a cause behind the universe. What kind of a cause could bring a universe into existence? Must be transcendent or separate from creation. Must be spirit or immaterial because it existed before the material world. Must be eternal or timeless because it existed before physical time came into being. Must be powerful given the immensity of the creation event. Must be smart given the precision of the creation event. Must be personal because he had to make the decision to create. Must be creative because, look at the cosmos. Must be loving because he so carefully crafted a habitat for us to flourish in. And the scientific principle of Occam's razor said there would be just one creator. Well, you look at those characteristics, that is a description of the God of the Bible. And so Bill Craig said, wait a minute, if God can create the cosmos, then for him to create a Y chromosome in Mary is child's play. So I think that makes sense. I think we have good evidence from cosmology, from physics, the fine-tuning of the universe, from biochemistry, the existence of biological information. We have good reason to believe that there is a supernatural creator behind the cosmos. And if that's true, then a virgin birth becomes easy. That becomes recreational. Yeah, that's right. That's a great point. Well, Bill Craig has been on this show before. Yes.
A brilliant guy.
Yeah.
And when he changes his mind on something, the whole world notices.
Yes.
And that's
that's true.
Yeah. Hey, talk about the how it makes theological sense for who Jesus is.
Yes. Jesus, we believe theologically, is fully God and fully man. He was, of course, fully God from eternity past. He never was created. He's always existed. And so he has the characteristics he is of the Godhead. And so, how is he born without original sin? How is he born without a corrupt moral nature? And the answer to that is found in John 1, verse 35, where it says, "The angel answered Mary and said, 'The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So that,'" in other words, the consequence of that is the Holy One, in other words, the one without sin, will be called the Son of God. So somehow the overpowering of Mary by the Holy Spirit resulted in the elimination of any corrupt moral nature being passed down. There is, Joseph's was not a factor in the birth of Jesus, and so now, if God can create a Y chromosome, he can also create the genetics necessary for a fully human person without sin to be created, and I think that's what happened. But so he is fully God and fully man. There was human involvement in his birth. There's divine involvement in his birth, and so theologically, that's important.
Lee, and I wanted to kind of take a little sidetrack here for just a second, because I've been spending a fair bit of time trying to help our students understand some of the issues of today, like socialism. And so I went back and read a lot of the early I guess what you would call Christian progressive socialists, people like Walter Rauschenbusch and many, many others. And nearly all of them denied both the virgin birth and the divinity of Christ.
Interesting.
And I've always wondered why their worldview, which tries to take Christianity and shoehorn it into a socialistic perspective, why that would be so important. Why would a scholar feel like it's so important to deny the virgin birth and the divinity of Christ?
Because it pulls the rug out of the Christian faith. If those things aren't true, then Christianity is of no help. It's of no use. Jesus is not then who he claimed to be, the unique Son of God. He once got up before a group and he said, "I and the Father are one." And the Greek word for one there is not masculine, it's neuter, which means Jesus was not saying I and the Father are the same person. He was saying I and the Father are the same thing. We're one in nature. We're one in essence. He claimed to be the Son of God. And the audience understood that. They said, you're just a man. You're claiming to be God. So Jesus claimed to be God. He died as our substitute to pay for the sins that we've committed so that he could offer forgiveness and eternal life as a free gift of his grace. If he is not the Son of God, if he was not virgin born and somehow corrupted by the ongoing original sin in human nature, that just pulls the rug out of Christianity. So it's kind of a handy way of reducing Christianity to folk tales. But it's not a folk tale. The best stories are the ones that are true.
Yeah. So you've got all these supposed scholars.
Yeah.
I think you've established in this conversation that the German theologians who were looking at this weren't operating on a scholarly trust to try to find the truth. They had an agenda to try to shape theology into some image that they could maybe control.
Hey, if you've been a fan of Summit Ministries for a long time, you've probably heard us talking about bridging the gap between truth and relationship. And we think bridging that gap can happen anywhere, including in your work. That's why every year we hire Summit interns. Hi, my name's Ellie Ramirez. I work in the publishing and content group at Summit Ministries, and once I was a Summit intern. And now every summer I get the privilege of overseeing, mentoring, and just walking alongside another Summit intern. And I'm here today with Emma Stevens, who was interned with us last summer, and she's gonna share a little bit with us about her experience. So Emma, what surprised you most about the internship program?
Yeah, so I was a hospitality intern this summer. I was able to do actually a lot of things across campus. I worked in gardening and helping maintain the grounds. I cooked a lot of stuff in the kitchen for students, picked up groceries, and just did kind of the odd jobs behind the scenes. I think what was most surprising to me about the internship was that you're not really doing busy work. I think that's kind of what I was expecting in an internship, is just they just tell you to do something and you get credit for doing it and you can put it on your resume. But my supervisor was really awesome. Her name is Molly, and she was just really good about finding what my unique gifts were and utilize those things and give me jobs that were aligned with those things so that I was actually able to do things that were impactful and things that brought me a lot of joy, which was really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, how did you feel that the overall program helped to encourage that kind of growth that it sounds like your supervisor was able to encourage in you?
That's a good question. So one thing that I think stands out about this internship as well is that we did a book study together as an intern group, which is kind of a great way for us to weekly all come together because we're working on different teams and don't have a lot of time working next to each other. But we studied Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller, and basically the whole point of that book is that God has placed you where you are with your talents to be used in work. And it's not all about how much money you make or if it's an important job, but it's actually about, what are the gifts that God has given you? And I could see that the supervisors and the mentors and the people that we were working with believed that as well, which just made it a really cool environment because it felt like I was working as who I was, not just as another person.
So Emma, if you had any advice for somebody who's looking to apply for the internship program, what would you encourage them in?
Yeah, I would say definitely go for it. I think that one of the coolest parts is not only do you work with awesome supervisors, but you also get weekly mentorship. And I think that the program is just really well-rounded in just developing you not only as a professional, but also as a person and as a person who loves Jesus. And it's just a great environment for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I know I definitely felt that way when I was an intern too. Yeah, so if you're interested in the Summit Intern Program, we have an opportunity for you. Whether you're in college, trade school, or you're just entering the workforce, we have a lot of roles posted on our website that will probably fit something you're interested in. So go ahead and go to summit.org/jobs and internships to apply today.
One of the things in the book that you do is you look at prophecy, and I love thinking about this. I've memorized many passages that are related to prophecies about the coming Messiah. But I wanted to talk about Isaiah 7 for a minute. And you talk about the idea of a double fulfillment.
Yes.
So let's talk about this for a minute, how the Old Testament prophecies point us toward Jesus in a way that makes it virtually impossible that this was just all a random chance.
It can't be a random chance. You look. There was a professor of mathematics at a college in California, Peter Stoner, who said, a lot of these prophecies about the coming Messiah could be quantified mathematically. So he got together a bunch of graduate students in mathematics and said, let's run the numbers. So, for instance, Micah 5 verse 2 says that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Which he was. Well, how many people have been born in Bethlehem? You can run the numbers. So they ran the numbers on 48 of these Old Testament prophecies that pointed to the Messiah, and they determined the odds of any human being by chance, by coincidence, fulfilling these prophecies would be one chance in a trillion.
Wow.
And you talk to any mathematician, he'll tell you, that's the same way of saying ain't going to happen by chance. It ain't going to happen by chance. And so one of the most famous prophecies that deals with Christmas is the virgin birth. Isaiah in chapter 7, did he prophesy that a virgin would give birth to the Messiah? And a lot of skeptics say, no, because he doesn't use the word for virgin. He uses the word alma in the Hebrew. And if he meant to use the word virgin, he would have used betula. Well, that's just not right. There is no one word in ancient Hebrew that always connotates virginity. So an alma is a young maiden. A young maiden in those days was presumed to be a virgin. Yeah. And betula could refer to a widow who would not be a virgin. So that's not the right word. Alma is the right word. In fact, before Jesus was even born, when translators were translating the ancient Hebrew, the Old Testament, into Greek, they recognized that meant virgin and translated it thusly in the Greek New Testament. Now, what's interesting, too, is if you read the passage, it's confusing, I think, until you really understand the hidden Hebrew there, and I've interviewed scholars on this, and it's fascinating. First of all, this passage in Isaiah 7 is ripe with messianic expectations. And what I mean by that is some people say, oh no, that was a prophecy for King Ahaz. And back then he was under siege by two other enemy armies. They wanted to kill him. And this was a prophecy for him that a young maiden would give birth and he would be rescued from his troubles. Well, King Ahaz was of the line of David. If he had been killed by his enemies who were trying to kill him at the time, it would have ended the line of David, and the Messiah was to come through the line of David. So this has huge messianic implications. What's more, this prophecy in Isaiah chapter 7 is in a nest of messianic prophecies. In Isaiah chapter 7, the Messiah is going to be born. In Isaiah chapter 9, he has been born and he's declared mighty God. In Isaiah chapter 11, he is reigning in the power of the Holy Spirit. So this is in a nest of messianic prophecies. But to keep it simple, because it does get complicated, there are two fulfillments there. There is one for Ahaz that says, by the time this young boy is old enough to know right from wrong, your problems are going to be solved. You're going to come out okay, basically. And people say, well, wait a minute. That happened 700 years before Jesus was born. If that's referring to that virgin birth child, then this would have happened 700 years before Jesus even came into Bethlehem. So it can't be right. Well, there's an earlier verse in Isaiah where God tells Isaiah, bring your son to your meeting with King Ahaz. And that is the son to which the prophecy is referring to. Mm-hmm. There's a transition in the Hebrew that doesn't even get translated into the English that makes this clearer. So let me just read you the passage. It says, therefore the God himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God among us. This is the prediction about the coming of the Messiah. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. That means he would live under oppression as he did under the Roman Empire. So all that is about the Messiah. And then there's this transition that you don't really see in the English. And it says, for before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. And then it says later, you're going to come out okay, Ahaz. Well, who's that boy? That's the son of Isaiah who God told to bring to the meeting. So Isaiah is saying, oh, by the way, by the time this boy, my son, by the time this boy is old enough to know right from wrong, but by that time he matures to that level, your problems, King Ahaz, are going to be taken care of. Don't worry about it. And indeed they were. So there's two prophecies here. Yes, there is one for King Ahaz, but there is one for the Messiah too. It does refer to a virgin birth, and so there's a double fulfillment of this passage.
This is amazing, and I hope that as people are watching or listening to this program right now that, let me just speak to you for a minute. Go back and read the book of Isaiah. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most significant things that you can do this
Absolutely.
Christmas season. Spend that time. You're going to read the Matthew account. You probably will read the Luke account, but go back and read the book of Isaiah and just let it settle on you that God spoke through the mouth of this prophet and many other prophets about things that they couldn't have fully understood.
Yes.
And yet they obediently wrote it down.
Yeah, you read Isaiah 53, and how many people, Jewish friends of mine, who've become Christians because they read Isaiah 53, and it is such a picture of the coming Messiah. It's the picture of Jesus' death and resurrection, and they come to faith because they say, how? I remember I have a friend named Louis Lapide. Louis was a Vietnam veteran, and he came back, and a sidewalk evangelist tried to share Jesus with him. And he says, hey, I'm Jewish. I don't believe this stuff. And the evangelist said, read Isaiah 53 from your Jewish scriptures. And he reads it, and he says, this was so clearly referring to Jesus that his theory was, the Christians have changed it. So he called a relative. He said, send me the Hebrew version of this.
Yeah.
And they did. And he realized, no, it hasn't been changed. And he not only became a Christian, he became a pastor and has a church in Thousand Oaks, California to this day.
Yeah, I love it. Isaiah 53 is one of my favorites. He'd be pierced
too.
for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities.
Yes.
Upon him, the chastisement that was due to all of us was placed, and by his wounds we are healed. Wow. Okay, I have so many questions.
Sure.
Let me just maybe three more.
Sure.
Students are always curious about the details that are mentioned, and some of them are quite odd. Like, who were the Magi, and what about the star that was over Bethlehem? And I'd love to hear what you uncovered in your research.
Yeah, the Bible doesn't give us a lot of detail about this. There's a lot of theories, a lot of speculation, but I think clearly Magi were from the East. They were most likely astrologers who studied the stars. They were pagan in their background because the Bible tells us in the Old Testament, don't depend on astrology or mediums or so forth. They were dabbling in that kind of stuff. And yet they follow I'll use the word in air quotes, a star, because the Greek word that's used there for star is flexible enough to mean any celestial object. Could have been a comet, could have been a planet, could have been a star, that somehow guided them in their journey. Now, one astrophysicist who's a friend of mine, Sarah Salviander, PhD in astrophysics, who was an atheist, who became a Christian studying science, studying the beginning of the universe. And her theory is that this was a nova or a supernova, which is a star that glows brightly for a while and then gets dimmer and then brighter for a while and dimmer and brighter for a while. And the average person would not notice this. You and I wouldn't notice this. But people who study the stars, like the Magi, would give it great significance, and where it is in the heavens would have significance astrologically. In other words, it would have significance if it were over here versus over there. She theorizes that maybe that is what kind of guided them to where they were going. Of course, the Bible, and the scholars of the day knew the child would be born in Bethlehem because of Micah 5, verse 2 in the Old Testament. So they knew people where he was going to be born anyway. But they supposedly came, and it was probably a bigger entourage than just the three of them. Three are mentioned because it would have been a journey that would have taken some time. They gave gifts: gold, which represented the royalty of Jesus; frankincense, which represented the divinity of Jesus; and interestingly, myrrh, which was a spice used in embalming. And to me, that just foreshadows the death, the ultimate death that Jesus, his mission in this world was to die for the sins of humankind. And that was an embalming spice that was used. We believe that Joseph and Mary probably sold the gold to finance their trip to Egypt. Mm-hmm. Maybe, maybe not. But here's the theological significance of the Magi. Yes, we don't have a lot of details. We don't know a lot of specifics. There are a lot of speculation about what the celestial body was, and people think they have it figured out. Maybe they do. But here's the theological significance. In the day, the Jewish people believed that the Messiah would be a political savior, that he would rescue them from the oppression of the Romans, and he would elevate the Jewish nation above all other nations. But the fact that these pagans came, these Gentiles came to worship the baby Jesus says he is not just the Christ child for the Jewish nation. He is the Christ child for all nations, for everybody. Even these pagans, even these Gentiles are coming to worship him. And that is the expansion of the messiahship of Jesus beyond just the Jewish nation to the entire planet. I think that's the real significance of these outsiders coming in to express their worship to God.
Yeah. Yeah, I see the theological significance. I guess I hadn't thought much about the astrological aspect, but it sounds like they sort of looked at the heavens and they kind of mapped out the earth as a reflection of the heavens.
It could be. We just don't know. We don't have the specifics, but I think that's one logical implication you could reach. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so let's, while we're in the details here, let's talk about Luke and the census.
Yeah.
Some people question the census. Some people question whether there was really a massacre at Bethlehem.
Right.
And I'd love to hear what you found about that.
Yeah, the problem with the census is that Luke says that this was the first census conducted under Quirinius. It was the governor of Judea at the time. And that census is pretty famous. The one that people think he's referring to, it occurred in 6 AD. And it was recorded by other historians because the Jewish people rebelled against it. So it became a big deal. The problem is King Herod died in about 4 BC, and he plays a role in this whole birth story. So you got a 10-year gap there. Herod was dead by the time that census was ever held. So what the heck? I mean, Luke was wrong, right? No, turns out Luke was right. And there's several ways we know this. Number one is there are many Greek experts who will say that the correct translation is that the census that drew Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem took place before Quirinius was governor of Judea. And so this would have been another census that took place before the famous 6 AD census. This particular census didn't have a rebellion associated with it, so nobody paid any attention to it historically. But there's a Swiss scholar who has now come up with, I think, is the best explanation. And that is, she found in the writings of Justin Martyr, who was an early apologist, Christian apologist, he refers to Quirinius at the time as being the procurator in Judea when the census was held. The word that Luke uses is not the one you would typically use to designate governor. There's other words you could have used to be more specific. The word he uses is more flexible. And here we have Justin Martyr referring to Quirinius as having been the procurator at the time. And the procurator would have overseen a census. And so apparently there was a census when Quirinius was procurator of Judea, and he oversaw that. And then later he becomes governor and has the famous census in 6 AD. So there was apparently this earlier census that he oversaw. So that has been kind of a breakthrough in terms of historical research by this Swiss scholar. And I think there's weight to give it. So either the translation could be read differently, or this theory about the procurator holds water, which I think it probably does in light of the Justin Martyr saying this way back, what was that, probably 2nd century, very, very early. That's another explanation that could account for it. So I think Luke, so many times historians think Luke is wrong, and then later discoveries show that he's right. I remember he mentions a guy named Licinius being the tetrarch of an area called Abilene in 20 AD or something like that. And people thought, "Oh, you idiot!" Everybody knows he would die 50 years before then. He was executed by Cleopatra. That's wrong. And then several years ago, they discovered a monument to Licinius, the tetrarch of Abilene, right when Luke said he was. There were apparently 2 Liciniuses. And that's the one he was referring to. So many times we think Luke is wrong, and yet he is meticulous in his accuracy. And that gives us confidence that his report of the birth of Jesus, as well as his gospel, as well as the book of Acts, the early spread of the church, he wrote a quarter of the entire New Testament. We can trust Luke as an historian.
Yeah. And if you were making this stuff up, say 300 years later, those are details you never would have.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, Lee, this last question may be personal. It seems to me that understanding the truth of Scripture increases our sense of awe and worship.
Yes.
But I do have people tell me, look, what you guys do in apologetics is not that important. Being intellectually satisfied is not related to having an awe and worship of God. That those are 2 separate things. That intellectual satisfaction and the feelings of awe and worship are distinct. But as you draw this project together, how has it affected your sense of awe at God's plan in your worship of Jesus?
Well, to me, this isn't true of everybody. It wasn't true of my wife. I mean, she didn't need historical data to come to faith in Christ. God opened her heart. She received Christ. She changed her life. For me and certain other people, my background's in journalism and law. I need evidence. I need data. I need corroboration. I need facts. And I needed the evidence to crack open my heart. You know, the prayer that my wife prayed for me when I was this hard-hearted atheist and she was a new Christian was Ezekiel 36:26. It says, "Moreover, I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit within you. I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh." And my wife prayed for me, "God, Lee's heart is like granite. I can't crack it open. Only you can crack it open. And I pray that you do." And God used evidence and historical data and scientific proofs to crack open my heart so that I realized this is not fairy tale. It's not make-believe. It's not wishful thinking. It's not mythology or legend. This is true. And knowing it was true for me creates that sense of wonder and awe. I just spoke a couple of days ago at a big church here in Houston. And I'm kind of sitting by myself in the green room before the service, before I'm to go up to speak about apologetics and evidence and so. And I'm watching the worship time take place, and I'm weeping. I'm weeping because of the worship that this God is real. This is true. It's awesome. His love endures. He loves me, even though I'm a terrible sinner. He loves me. And that worship time just touched my soul in a fresh way. I think that's what apologetics does for a lot of people. It's not just an intellectual endeavor. It points us toward the reality of the faith, and that deepens our faith in who God is, what he has done for us, which increases our awe and wonder at the same time.
That's so well put. I felt the same way when I first started realizing, there are actual answers to these big questions. It didn't harden my heart against being in awe of what God did. It opened my heart to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Well, this book is called The Case for Christmas. And so we're going to put this episode out right away. And we want you, if you're watching or listening, to think about a couple of things. First of all, the book it's not very much money. If you go to christianbook.com, I think is the website. They've got it there.
It's under
for just
$2.
A couple of dollars.
Yeah.
So buy 5 copies and just ask God, who are the people in your life who you think their hearts would be opened by reading this? And if you're embarrassed to give it to them, just say, "Hey, I found this little book and man, he's got some startling claims in here. Would you check it out and just see what you think?" And then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to convince people all at one time. You just want to be responsible to give people good information when the opportunity arises. If you're a pastor of a church, you can get a case of books or 2. If you're a customer at Hobby Lobby, so Hobby Lobby is giving this book to customers
free,
from what I understand, for free.
Yeah.
So if you're a customer at Hobby Lobby, then you might get a copy there, and then you can hand that one on to other people as well. But this is such a great message, Lee, and so perfect for this particular time.
Well,
Thank you.
I appreciate your evangelistic heart in this, Jeff, because I bought 300 copies. I had to buy them myself, ironically, as I wrote the book. I bought 300 copies of the book, and my goal is to give them away to people I encounter between now and Christmas. And I've been giving them away to flight attendants on airplanes, to clerks at hotels, to waitresses and waiters at restaurants. I was at the doctor getting my annual checkup. I gave them to all the receptionists and all the nurses and the doctors and so on. I'm just giving. And you know what? People so much appreciate a book. So many times I'll hand them a book and they'll say, "Oh, a book. I love to read." I've had that response so many times. So that's why I wrote it. The gospel is spelled out very clearly in the book. So my prayer, as you say, is that people will read it, but give it away, or buy a couple copies and give them away. That's what we call them, spiritual stocking stuffers.
Yes.
Give them away.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, this truth is too valuable to be held to ourselves. This is the time to share it. So Lee, thank you for giving us an opportunity to do that today. So grateful to have you on the show.
Well, you're awesome, Jeff. Appreciate you and your ministry, and I hope you and all of your viewers just have a great Christmas this year.
Thank you. Thank you to my guest, Lee Strobel, for coming on the show. You can go to leestrobel.com, STROBEL, leestrobel.com, to find more of Lee's resources. The book we've been talking about, The Case for Christmas, you can get anywhere books are sold. Get a bunch of them and distribute them. That'll be a great opportunity to share your faith this Christmas. This podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. At Summit, we come alongside the rising generation and their trainers, their parents, and their influencers so that young adults may know God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. If you want to learn more about Summit Ministries or get resources to help the young people in your life, it's enrollment season for next summer for young adults 16 to 22 to be able to spend 12 days in one of the life-changing programs that we will have in Colorado and in South Carolina this summer. Just all of it. Go to summit.org and you'll find a phone number there to give us a call if you can't find what you need. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.